Hello and welcome to Bangladesh Today. I'm Smita Prakash. Today we meet with counter-terrorism expert Dr. Ajay Sahni, who's also the Executive Director of the Institute for Conflict Management in New Delhi. Thank you for speaking to us. I'd like to begin by asking you about the recent ruling where the Jamaat-e-Islami has been declared, their registration has been taken away, the court ruling in Bangladesh, and they cannot contest the elections anymore. And knowing the Jamaat, it's not going to take it lying down, and they're going to go on to the streets and there's going to be violence. Do you see a period of intense conflict in the next 5 months or 6 months before elections?
Absolutely, but I'd like to say one thing before that. This is really restoring a status quo ante. The Jamaat was banned immediately after the liberation struggle because of its terrible role in the genocide of 1971. Unfortunately, the internal politics of the country restored it to a degree of political respectability, and the Jamaat has utilized that to increasingly create a radicalized base within the country. Now the courts have reversed or taken us back to the situation where the Jamaat has rightly been banned as an organization involved in crimes against humanity. And this has in fact in its subsequent avatar also been the case that their radicalized cadres have been involved in a number of terrorist organizations, the Jamaat-e-Islami Ameer, the Jamaat-ul Mujahideen Bangladesh.
These Huji and all were not political outfits, right? They were terror outfits.
They were terrorist outfits
and
clearly, and a large proportion of their leadership was actually ex-Jamaat cadre. Always ex-Jamaat. They maintained that distinction between the Jamaat and the terrorist outfits. But you had a very large representation of ex-Jamaat in their cadre and their leaderships. So they've engaged in terrorism also over the past decades. Rightly, this organization has been banned, but yes, it immediately raises the problem that having been excluded from the electoral political process, they will be driven underground and will engage more and more in criminal and underground violence.
Now they seem to have a legit grievance, right? And
well, they will have legitimate grievances of all sorts. Their first and foremost grievance is that Bangladesh is not an Islamic state, and that has to be
which was
imposed.
Always the case. No, what I mean is right now they have even legitimate, in their eyes legitimate, that they are not able to even contest an election. So now the judiciary also comes under their
well, that has been the
range.
case. Actually, this grievance, yes, the grievance in a sense has escalated. But this grievance in a sense has existed since 2010 when this whole
war crime
trial process started,
and
their top leadership
right.
was arrested and was processed again, and has one after another been sentenced. So I don't think there is any shortage of grievances.
Okay.
Moreover, this is an organization that will manufacture grievances. It exists on this primary grievance of injustice against Islam. So I don't think there is any unique cause over here. The danger, however, is that they will now engage in much more underground violence, but it is a danger that I think should rightly be confronted by the Bangladesh state, which appears to have decided that this is to be dealt with, not brushed under the carpet or managed or in some sense through the use of political manipulation, co-opted.
Will she be? Will Sheikh Hasina be able to withstand this pressure? Because I mean, like you said, the Jamaat doesn't believe in the sovereignty of Bangladesh. It never did. It didn't believe that it needed to be needed to break away from Pakistan. It's always had this this strain continuing in its protest against the secular fabric of the constitution, the parliament, about how Bangladesh should be run. Will she be able to withstand now this militant movement that they are going to unabashedly go into?
You see, one can never really make predictions. It's a very unstable country. It's been comparatively extremely stable over the last 5 years. Sheikh Hasina has demonstrated tremendous will, and I think we see a further crystallization of will over the past 3 or 4 years. Through the war crimes trials, she has withstood massive street protests without backing off. So I think she has understood that this is a decisive battle. It is in fact a battle for the future and the life of Bangladesh, and of her, and not only political, perhaps her very survival
Why
is
do you
now
say
dependent.
that?
Well, I do not think that she would survive a BNP JEI regime again.
Really, it's that bad?
Oh, absolutely. I think she would be targeted by all means available if she loses power in Bangladesh. She would not be able to survive perhaps in Bangladesh. She may do so in exile. Because this is now, it's personal, it's life and death.
So the level of intolerance in the BNP Jamaat combined has reached to such an extent that they would not hesitate to assassinate the top-rung leadership of the Awami League if they feel that their power base could be corroded, if they could lose the election, or do you see it as a post-election scenario only?
I basically see it as a post-election scenario, except that, there have been attacks against her in the past as well.
True.
There have been assassination attempts against her in the past as well, all of them linked to this combine. So the fact that her life is threatened is not in question. The difference between being in power and being out of power is that she has the entire state to protect her at this juncture. And when she's out of power, the protection of the state would immediately be questionable or compromised. We've seen this happening in Pakistan.
Yeah, one thought that Bangladesh was different, at least in the past 5 years, that the leadership didn't need to, leave the country if it lost the election. But obviously, it's not mature to that level.
No, you see, the past 5 years are in discontinuity with the preceding 20 odd years.
Correct.
Which saw a continuous decline in the quality of politics and in the radicalization processes, in the greater intervention of violence in the political structures. So the past 5 years have been different because Sheikh Hasina has chosen to make them different.
But it's still precarious, you say.
It is still precarious. If you see the efforts of street mobilization and the efforts of disruption, they are quite continuous with the preceding trends, which have always been very, very high efforts of continuous efforts by opposition parties to disrupt normal functioning of governance through street protests. Now, this continues. So I don't think everything in Bangladesh has changed. What has changed is governance, and under this particular regime, if you take that element away, I would suggest you will come back to a much more vengeful old paradigm.
Okay. When we talk about conflict situations just before election, the government in power usually takes populist measures. It eases up on harsh measures, even at a provincial level. You've seen that happening when it comes to cracking down on Maoists in India, when it comes to cracking down on terror groups in Pakistan. I mean, you saw what happened with the Punjab government there. They just, let it go to such an extent in Punjab and Pakistani Punjab. Now, do you think that Sheikh Hasina will be able to strike that balance that, of not cracking down completely on terror groups out there? Does she need to? Or does she have enough popular support in Bangladesh to really take these harsh measures that she does need to take to curb militancy there?
You see, her popular support today is a base that is in direct conflict and opposition to the extremist radicalized constituency. It's a polarized situation. She cannot imagine through conciliation of the radical constituency that she will gain more than she would lose from her own
core base.
Okay. So it's not a good political gamble for her to try to soften now.
Okay.
This is a decisive struggle between the two ideological poles, if you please. And she has committed herself far too much to now begin to backtrack, just months before the election. She cannot change her political base. So what she can do is perhaps other populist measures that would help her consolidate a wider base. She has much to show for development. She will have more to show over the coming months. I think some.
But the message gets, it gets diluted in sorts when there is a terror element going on. I mean, if that's what Jamaat wants to do, to up the ante, go into a mode where they literally shut down markets, band calls, which is what they're planning to do, then everything, development takes a back seat.
Not really, because you see, the band has to be very, very successful in order to, and it has to be very protracted. Now, what they have been doing is they have been able to break these protests very substantially. They have taken very harsh measures. They have been shooting into the crowds, and without any kind of national upsurge against it. In fact, what you really have is an unprecedented national upsurge against the radicals.
The Shahbag movement.
We have the Shahbag movement, and that Shahbag movement has actually spread across the country.
Even against the war crimes verdicts, they were just sporadic events which happened, protests.
Wherever you've seen soft verdicts against, or what were perceived as soft verdicts against the war criminals, you've had, almost spontaneous protests against them. So I think she has to recognize that this is her constituency, and whatever you see.
And that's large enough for her to come back to power?
That I could not predict. I would have said that 6 months or a year ago it was very uncertain. But as we are approaching the elections, she seems to be consolidating her base in Bangladesh. She is now seen as someone who is possibly the only option to provide stability. The radicalized constituency is not going to come to her.
Okay. When we talk about the radicalized constituencies, which is, are they supporting, besides the Jamaat, there's also the Rohingya problem now, she has managed to crack down to a certain extent as far as border management is concerned about the Rohingyas. But then now the latest reports are that she has admitted that there are terror camps in Bangladesh where Rohingyas are being trained, and they are getting support from the Lashkar-e-Taiba.
Yes.
So this is it's a horrific situation for Bangladesh and for India as well.
You see, the Rohingya issue is a problem for all three countries, Myanmar, Bangladesh, India. It is a potential problem. But as far as Bangladesh is concerned, if you see the record of the past 5 years, or rather the record of almost from 2006, 2007 onwards, they have been very successful in identifying and disrupting the terrorist networks. They have destroyed the Bangladeshi network of the JMB, the JB. They have suppressed the Harkatul Jihad Islami. So it is not very easy. The Lashkar-e-Taiba is not a magical formation.
But the Lashkar-e-Taiba comes with deep pockets. They're getting Saudi backing. So far, the Huji was getting a little bit of Lashkar backing. But when you're talking about the Rohingyas, being trained by the LET, you just know that it's going to be enough.
That I would suggest is slightly inaccurate.
Okay.
Huji was completely in with the Lashkar, was completely backed by the ISI. So was JMB, JMJB when they were operational. So it's not a dearth of outside support that has resulted in a collapse of these movements. It's actually very focused state action that has resulted in the collapse of these movements. Consequently, I would like to suggest that the Bangladesh intelligence and security forces are today in a much better condition or situation to manage any potential terrorist threat than certainly Myanmar or India would be.
Why would you say that? Because of their location. What other reason could there be?
Well, they've gone all out after these forces. There's no doubt in their mind. There is not a constant political
available on what is the goal of the Rohingya militant movement, not just the Rohingya issue or the problem that it faces politically in Myanmar, but what is their militant movement, what is their goal, what is their aim, what is the geographical area that they want to work under, and what is, is there a pan-Islamist movement that one has to be watch out for between the Rohingyas, the LET, the JUD combined in that, like a crescent.
You see, first of all, we must, just because a particular group has suddenly become associated with a terrorist organization and with a larger terrorist movement backed by the Pakistani state, we must not forget that this is a population with a problem. Okay, so you have to separate the Rohingyas from potential Rohingya terrorism.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said.
That's a very important thing. Now, when you say what are the objectives of the Rohingyas, who are you speaking of?
No,
are you
just
speaking
the
of
no, not the. You see, not the refugee Rohingyas who are coming and taking.
So this distinction is very necessary.
Absolutely.
The political relief that the Rohingya populations are seeking are a different issue. The terrorists who are being mobilized by the external forces today, their objective is pan-Islamist, because they are being organized on a pan-Islamist platform. And I have a very clear intelligence on this, that the Lashkar-e-Taiba has placed a precondition on the Rohingyas that they will act against India as well.
Yeah, Hafiz Saeed has made a statement where he's...
Well, he hasn't said that the Rohingyas must act against India, but he's taken it as a broad Islamist thing that we will protect our brothers. But if you are trying to protect your brothers, your Muslim brothers in Myanmar, why are you mobilizing those brothers to fight against India? Because you have basically a pan-Islamist orientation. Now, do the Rohingya cadre share this, or the potential Rohingya cadre share this objective? That is not clear, but they may be forced or co-opted because of conditional assistance that they receive to act against India in future, and this is an Indian concern. Let me also add over here that Rohingya terrorism is still not a fact.
Okay.
It is still potential. We haven't seen any major acts of terrorism. You may see there has been training, very certainly reported.
But it's time to watch out for this.
Oh, absolutely. There is never time to sleep as far as security.
Because is Sheikh Hasina, I mean, should she watch out for the fact that the Rohingya militant movement could join up with the Jamaat elements, and you know, it could be a huge problem on her hands?
You see, if we see the various statements that have been made by the Bangladesh government over the past months, they are very clearly aware of the problem. So if they are aware of the problem, they have put out their position on the problem. I am sure their intelligence agencies and their security agencies are not sleeping over it.
Thank you very much for speaking with us, Dr. Sahni.
You're very welcome. Or taken us back to the situation where the Jamaat has rightly been banned as an organization involved in crimes against humanity. And this has, in fact, in its subsequent avatar also been the case that their radicalized cadres have been involved in a number of terrorist organizations, the Jamaat-e-Islami, the Jamaat-ul-Mujahideen Bangladesh.
These Huji and all were not political outfits, right? They were terror outfits.
They were terrorist
clearly,
outfits clearly, and a large proportion.
Who's also the executive director of the Institute for Conflict Management in New Delhi. Thank you for speaking to us. I'd like to begin by asking you about, you know, the recent ruling where the Jamaat-e-Islami has been declared, their registration has been taken away, the court ruling in Bangladesh, and they cannot contest the elections anymore. And knowing the Jamaat, it's not going to take it lying down, and they're going to go on to the streets, and there's going to be violence. Do you see a period of intense conflict in the next 5 months or 6 months before election?
Portion of their leadership was actually ex-Jamaat cadre. Always ex-Jamaat. They maintained that distinction between the Jamaat and the terrorist outfits. But you had a very large representation of ex-Jamaat in their cadre and their leaderships. So they've engaged in terrorism also over the past decades. Rightly, this organization has been banned, but yes, it immediately raises the problem that having been excluded from absolutely, but I'd like to say one thing before that. This is really restoring a status quo ante. The Jamaat was banned immediately after the liberation struggle because of its terrible role in the genocide of 1971. Unfortunately, the internal politics of the country restored it to a degree of political respectability, and the Jamaat has utilized that to increasingly create a radicalized base within the country. Now the courts have reversed.
Hello and welcome to Bangladesh Today. I'm Smita Prakash. Today we meet with counter-terrorism expert Dr. Ajay Sahni,